Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and this is kind of like the live thing. No one's going to see this, I don't think. It will be recorded on the thing and posted on the thing. This is the long promised introduction to Sun Tzu, about the man and the reputation. Now, what's so interesting about Sun Tzu is, well, I mean, we have to understand it's the concept of who he is and why does he play such an important role, and why are we interested in him. And he's interesting because he expresses in a very short book a book of strategy and thinking about how to engage in conflict and how to achieve victory. um, he was born traditionally around 544 BC. So therefore, he was around this is around what this is what, five, and he died in apparently in 496 BC at the age of 47 to 48. Um, um, what would that make it? Let's look at this. The famous character Socrates, the Greeks. He lived, 100 years before, 100 years before Socrates, and even Thucydides. Um, yeah, so the historian Thucydides, yeah, he died 400 BC. So he was around like born 460, died 460. So again, 100 years before even Thucydides. Herodotus. I'm talk about Herodotus for a second. Look, we don't know where he's dead. Yeah, He was born in 484 and died in 425. So if we look at Sun Tzu, just as he dies uh, he died even before Herodotus was. So therefore, this is, in other words, and at this time, the Greeks and the Romans knew very little of China. Okay, we know very little about China. Um, the argument is much of we know about Sun Tzu is historically uncertain because we know that the Han Dynasty historian Sima Quan and other traditional Chinese historians placed him a minister to King Hetu of Wu and dated his lifetime between 544 to 496. Modern scholars accepting his historicity places the the text of the art of war in the later warring states period. Therefore, this doesn't fit that much. It was a little later than this point that they do. The traditional account states that the general's descendant, Sun Bin, wrote a treatise on military tactics, also called The Art of War. Since Sun Wu and Sun Bin are referred to as Sun Tzu in classical texts, some historians believe them identical prior to the discovery of Sun Bin's treatise in 1972. So therefore, there's this kind of confusion. Some people would say, "Oh, no, maybe that's these were, we think there were one. Now we know that there's two." Sun Tzu has been praised and employed in Asian warfare since its composition. During the 20th century, it gained popularity and saw practical use in the Western world. In other words, it came particularly with the Giles translation of the turn of the century. The Giles translation is probably the most important one for our purposes of this. The historicity of the man. Older sources disagree about where he was born. Some say he was born either in Kuai or Wu. Okay, um, you can go check these maps of ancient China. He says um, um, the spring and autumn annuals and Silam Kwan's later record of the great historian, the Shi states that Sun was in Kui. But sources also agree that Sun Tzu was born in the late spring and autumn period, and that he was active as a general and strategist serving Wu in the 6th century BC, beginning around 512. His victories then inspired him to write The Art of War, the argument goes. In other words, we know that his book was widely read during the Warring States period, which was around in China. There was a series of the empire kind of broke down. It went up here. The Warring State period is between a time, there's it's around between, it starts with the partitioning of Jin. The early Warring State period is between 403 BC to 340 BC, right? And then there's this breakdown of kings, and then there's period that then from dukes become the kings, and the various regional lords become bosses on their own from 344, and therefore this creates a series of conflicts that go up until through 314, like this. So 314. There's a whole series from 334 to 249 BC of all these virtual alliances. And then again, what happens is in around 247, 221, the Quinn Dynasty, Quinn totally unites China, which is from the western part of the traditional China, looking at the warring states. So what's so interesting about this is that he will be immediately reliant on the various Chinese states of Zhao, Kuai, Qin, Chao, Han, Wei, and Wan, who fought control in western expanse of fertile eastern China. So therefore, what happens is the eastern part is fertile, the western part isn't. It will be the western who will conquer win and unify China, in that sense, in this thing. One of the better known stories about Sun, taken from Sima Quan, illustrates Sun Tzu's temperament as follows. Before hiring Sun Tzu, the king of Wu tested Sun Tzu's skill by commanding him to train a harem of 80 concubines and soldiers. Sun Tzu divided them into two companies, appointing two concubines most favored by the king as company commanders. When Sun Tzu ordered the concubines to face right, then they giggled. In response, Sun Tzu said that the generals, in this case himself, was responsible for ensuring that the soldiers understood the command given to them. He then reiterated the command, and once again the concubines giggled. Sun Tzu ordered the execution of the king's two favorite concubines, to the king's protest. He explained that if the general soldiers understood their commands but did not obey, it was the fault of the officers. Sun Tzu also said that once a general was appointed, it was his duty to carry out his mission, even if the king protested. So this is the famous story. And both concubines were killed. New officers were chosen to replace them. Afterwards, both companies, now well aware of the cost of future frivolity, performed their maneuvers flawlessly. So this is the famous story about this. This is taken from this account is taken from Bradford 2000, Alfred S. Bradford 2000, with Arrow, Sword, and Spear: The History of the Ancient World by Prager. Well, let's look at this in that sense. The Sun Tzu then some claims that Sun Tzu later prove his battlefields that his theories were effective. For example, the famous Battle of Beaujeu, which is the decisive battle in 506. fought between the Wu and the Chu, two major kingdoms in the spring and autumn period. Wu forces were led by King Helu, his brother Feng, and Chou exile Wu Zhou. According to Quinn Dynasty, Sun Tzu was the main commander of Wu's army, but was not mentioned in the Zhujian and other early historic texts. The Chu forces were led by Lingun, the prime minister in Nagan, known as Jing, and Sema, chief military commanders. Seyet's and Sema's chief military commander, Xin Yetsu. The Wu were victorious and captured and destroyed the capital, the Chu's capital of Yang. And therefore, this is the question: was he really there? What he's not? This was a major, decisive battle that changed the war. And the historian of the time, Sima Quinn, he's a Chinese historian of the early Han Dynasty. He's considered the father of Chinese historiography. Attributes the victory of Bozhu to Sun Tzu. So therefore, we have their own sources at the time. So therefore, we have a little problem. Is that therefore there's a big question around the 12th century. In other words, like I said, the Zohan, the historical text written centuries earlier than the Shihai, which is the record that Sima Quan gives us, provides a much more detailed account of the Battle of Bozhu and does not even mention Sun Tzu at all. So we have a question: is Sun Tzu really there? The earlier account of it by the Zosuhan, which gives the accurate account, a very accurate, detailed account of what happened in the battle, whereas Sima Quan's Shije attributes the victory to Sun Tzu. Around 12th century AD, some Chinese scholars begin to doubt the existence of this, primarily on the grounds he's not mentioned in the historical classic, which mentions most of the notable figures of the spring and autumn period. The name Sun Wu does not appear in any text prior to the records of the grand historian, and may have been a made-up descriptive commingling between the fugitive warrior, the name Sun, and the surname Sun can be glossed as relating him to the fugitive Zun, while Wu is the ancient Chinese virtue of martial valence, which corresponds to Sun Tzu's role as the hero's doppelganger in the story of Wu Jing. The only historic battle attributed to Sun Tzu, the Battle of Bozhu, has no record of him fighting in that battle. Okay, so skeptics cite possibly historic inaccuracies, anachronisms in the text. And the book was actually a compilation from different authors and military strategists. In other words, attributing the authorship of the art of war varies among scholars. That included people and movements, including Sun, true scholar Wu Jing, an anonymous author, a school of theory in Kui and Wu, Sun Bin, and others. In other words, there was like this. These different authors, a true scholar, Wu Zun, anonymous authors, an anonymous author, a school of theorists in Kui or Wu, and Sun Bin and others. Now, who says this is again Sawyer 2005. Sawyer 2005 is Ralph D. Sawyer's The Essential Art of War, basic books. And then he in 2007, Sawyer will produce 7 military classics of ancient China. The art of war is just a very important thing. The question is this a real person, or is it mythical? We don't know. There's a big argument about this. Now, um, in other words, Sun Bin appears to have been the actual person who was a general in authority in military matters, and may have been the inspiration for the creation of the historic figure Sun Tzu through a form of euphemism. Um, a euphemism is an approach in the interpretation of mythology in which mythical accounts are presumed to have originated with a real historic event or personages. So therefore, this is a kind of story, a form of approach of giving an artificial person to represent someone who's real. Okay, so Sun Tzu might have been created to represent something. The name Sun Wu does appear in later sources. Sun Wu does appear in later sources such as the Shili and Viwu's Komingu, but were written centuries after Sun Tzu's era. So the use of strips and other works, however, such as the method of the Sima, is considered proof of Sun Tzu's historic priority. Again, this goes back to Sawyer, Sawyer's 1994 book, um, uh, Art of War. That's the first book that he wrote. It was a translation by Westview. Um, I always have to be careful about this. Every time I want to say something good about something, I have this kind of urge that it's not. Yeah, it's Ralph Sawyer's big book, Art of War, which is the translation. And I remember that. I just wanted to make sure if I was being correct. Um, so therefore, this is the problem with this. In other words, Ralph Sawyer again continues. It was very likely that he did exist, and not only served as a general, but also wrote the core of the book that bears his name. So Sawyer makes the argument for the existence of, and actually, that's why he becomes one of the biggest advocates of this. It is argued that there is a disparity between large-scale war and the sophisticated techniques detailed in the text, and more primitive small-scale battles that have predominated the Chinese period of the 6th century. Against this, Sawyer argues that the teaching of Sun Wu were probably taught the succeeding generations in his family, or of small school disciplines, which eventually included Sun Bin. These descendants or students may have revised or expanded upon certain points of the original text. Skeptics who identify issues with the traditional point of view to possible anachronisms in Sun Tzu's, including terms, technology such as anachronistic crossbows, and the mention of cavalry. Because why? Because the horses were not generally available in that sense. They came much later in that sense. The philosophic ideas and events and the military techniques that should not have been available to Sun Wu. In other words, the earlier guy. So in other words, there's a lot of anachronism in the text. Additionally, there's no records of professional generals in the spring and autumn period. These are only extents from the warring period, state period. So there is doubt as to Sun Tzu's rank and his generalship in that sense. This caused much confusion as when the Art of War was actually written. The first traditional view is that it was written in 512 BC by the historical Sun Wu, and active in the last years of the spring and autumn period. That is, the spring and autumn period is 722 BC to 481 BC, right? The second view, led by scholars such as Samuel Griffith, places the Art of War during the middle to late warring state period, that is 481 to 421. Finally, a third school claims that the slips were published in the second half of the 5th century BC. This is based on the adherent interprets the bamboo strips discovered in Yangshan in 1972, AD current time. So therefore, the idea of the bamboo strips of the things. which has Sun Tzu's Art of War collection on the strips. They exist to this day. Those strips, discovered in 1970, and it's part of the collection at Shandong Museum. I should have had the thing to share screens a little bit in the province and the city of Ying, Shandong, in the city of Ying in Shandong province of China. It's one of the country's largest museums in China. They have the actual the bamboo sticks with the God of War on it. And that's why some people argue that because of sticks. Now the question is, there's arguments that no, that's not really things. What's so interesting is that the name will be different and different. It will the role him within other things. The traditional Chinese name, Wade's Gillis tries it Cheng Xing. I can't ever say these things right. Chenang Xixing, and it's typed out in very different words. The Vietnamese Ton Vu, the Korean name. There's two versions of the Korean name, and also in Vietnamese is the Latinate language name versus the Han and Non version, and the Japanese also. The Japanese, the Kanjai and the Hangua, will have different versions. And it has a very important role of this. Again, the Art of War is traditionally ascribed to Sun Tzu in the book itself, and that stuff of the military text written before the unification of China, and this Sri Hangua subsequent book burning in the 2nd century. 6 major works have survived. During the much later Song Dynasty, these 6 works were combined with the Yang text into a collection called the 7 Military Classics. A central part of that composition. The Art of War formed the foundation of orthodox military theory of early modern China. Illustrating this point, the book was required reading to pass the test for the imperial appointments to military positions. So in other words, this will be why this book will be so important in Chinese. Sun Tzu's Art of War uses language that may be unusual in a Western text and warfare and strategy. For example, in the Levels chapter states the leader must be serene and inscrutable and capable of comprehending unfathomable plans. The text contains several similar remarks that have long confused Western readers lacking the awareness of the Eastern Asian context, meaning that such statements are clearer when interpreted in the context of Taoist thought and practice. In other words, the connection between Taoism. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you don't need to know Taoism that much to understand this. I think the over-contextualization can be problematic. So therefore, that's why you have to take this little bit of light. Most source, I'm kind of reading the source material on this, saying that it would argue for the context. In other words, meanings of such statements are, it says clear. Sun Tzu viewed the idea general as an enlightened Taoist master, the argument goes. And this led to the Art of War being considered a prime example of Taoist strategy. There was, Taoist strategy and that stuff. The book also became popular among political leaders and those in management studies, hence why the Art of War addressed strategy in broad fashion, touching on public administration and planning. The text outlined theories of battle, but it also advocates diplomacy and the cultivation of relationships with other nations as the essentials of the health of the state. In April 1972, Quinn Han's tombs were accidentally unearthed by a construction worker in Shandong. The scholars uncovered a collection of ancient texts written on unusually well-preserved bamboo strips. Among them were the Art of War and Sun Tzu's military methods. Although Han Dynasty biographies noted the later publication as extensive and written by the descendants of Sun, it had been previously lost. The recovery of Sin Bin's work is regarded extremely important by scholars because both Sun Bin's relationship to Sun Tzu, and because of the work's additional body of military thought on Chinese late antiquity. The discovery as a whole significantly expanded the body of the warring state military theory. Sun Bin's treatise is is the only known military text surviving from the warring state period discovered in the 20th century and bears close similarity to the art of war of all surviving texts of the previous surviving text. So there's a similarity of this. The influence of this, again, is important. Sun Tzu's notable figure, and the Chinese historian recounted that the first Chinese historical emperor, Quinn Dynasty, considered the book invaluable and ending the time of the warring states. By the 20th century, Mao Zedong partially credited his victory over Shanghai Shek and the Kunlun to the art of war. The work strongly influenced Mao's writing on guerrilla warfare, which further influenced communist insurgencies around the world. The art of war was introduced into Japan around 760 AD, and the book quickly became popular among Chinese generals. Though its later influence in the Shungu period of great unifiers of Japan, through its later influence on this later period, the great unifiers, Ugata, Nugata, Toyomai, Tayodishi, and I always say Asian names, I say names, and Tugatu Ilusha, these leaders of the unification of things. It significantly attracted the unification of Japan in the early modern era. The mastery of its technique was honored among the samurai, and its teachings were both exhorted and exemplified in the influential Daimiros and the shoguns. After the Meiji Restoration, it remained popular among the imperial general armed forces. Admiral of the Fleet Togo Hirohushu, who led Japan's forces in the victory in the Russo-Japanese War, was an avid reader of Sun Tzu. Ho Chi Minh translated the work Sun Tzu's Art of War for his Vietnam officers to study. His general, Wu Nijingap, the strategist behind the victories over the French and American forces, was a likewise avid student and practitioner of Sun Tzu. American-Asian conflicts against Japan, North Korea, North Vietnam brought Sun Tzu to the attention of American military leaders. The Department Army, through its Command and General Staff College, had directed all units to maintain libraries with their respective headquarters for the continuing education of personnel on the art of war. The art of war is mentioned as an example of works to be maintained at each facility and staff officers college, and are obliged to prepare short papers and presentations to other officers on their reading of this book. Similarly, and I can tell you this, my experience in the other services and friends who went to the war colleges, this is true. I mean, most of the war colleges, Sun Tzu will be required reading. The art of war is mentioned, for example, to be maintained at each faculty on the general staff and for obliged short papers over that. Similarly, Sun Tzu is listed on the Marine Corps professional reading program. Again, this is something they have the reading program starting in the 80s, that the Marines have to read books, and Sun Tzu is always listed on it. During the Gulf War in the 1990s, both General Schwarzkopf and Colonel Powell employed principles of Sun Tzu in deception, speed, and striking one's enemy's weakest point. However, the United States and Western countries have been criticized for not truly understanding the work and not appreciating the cultural context of this thing. But this is what the editors of here are saying here. I think the editors here are just kind of oversaying that. I think the Americans try to do this, and actually, I even said some criticisms of Sun Tzu that the modern world would not tolerate it's not seen as it's not considered as Sun Tzu argues for the constant use in looting and taking in the enemy territory, live off their land, live off their food, live off their thing. This is something that actually in middle of the start of the 19th century was seen as a danger, because you'd alienate the locals. Okay, you became you reinforce. In other words, you needing to live off them saw the situation that you became, they were not going to welcome you. They weren't going to be seen as liberators. So even if you were liberating countries, you wouldn't be seen as liberators because your soldiers would take away from the things. And therefore, this is why Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, I think it was Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, in his Peninsula campaign in Spain, relied on resources constantly coming from Britain. And this could only be done by a change of the nature of banking that was not possible, in the new modern finance and of mechanisms of finance and public debt that was created by the British at this time, allowed it to finance a major war and supply the soldiers by sea and constant supply by sea, so they wouldn't have to take off the people. And this explains why Britain, to this day, the British liberation of Spain against the French are not held in resentment in that sense. So therefore, this would be a criticism of, in other words, modern warfare. We look at some of Sun Tzu's advice. Now, I would argue Sun Tzu's right. If you can get resources, use the enemy's resources. But at the same time, it's not always possible. But again, this is why this is a very interesting aspect of this. In other words, the applications of the art of war strategies throughout history is a tribute to its philosophic rhetoric. The Taoism is central to the principle in art of war. This is why something's Stephen Combs, he talks about the rhetoric of parsimony. His article, is it article? I think it is an article or book. Yeah, it's an article in the Quarterly of Speech, talking about how the language of Sun Tzu's and his art of war. There's a rhetoric of doing less with more. In other words, it compares Taoist Chinese to traditional Aristotelian rhetoric. Notably, the difference is in persuasion. Taoist rhetoric in the art of war, warfare strategies is described as peaceful and passive, favoring silence over speech. This form of communication is parsimonious. Parsimonious behavior in which highly emphasized in the art of war avoids confrontation and against the aspect of spirituality. But I think this is a misleading understanding of this, because why? The opposite is getting into victory, achieving victory, having overwhelming victory. In other words, you don't talk, you don't be aggressive, you just say what things. But that blunt saying or short saying is designed to be also effective and powerful. Mark McNeely in Sun Tzu and the Art of Modern Warfare states that the modern interpretation of Sun and his importance throughout Chinese history is critical in understanding China is supposed to become a superpower in the 20th century. Modern Chinese scholars explicitly rely on historic settings, lessons in the art of war, in developing their theories, seeing the direct relationship between their modern struggles and those of China in the Sun Tzu time. And therefore, there is a great perceived value in Sun Tzu Chinese and other Chinese writers, which are regularly developed in Chinese, developing the strategies of the new Chinese state and its current leaders. So again, this is my promised little video on Sun Tzu. It's longer than I thought it would be. I was taking information from the web for people. You can find it yourself and look at it. I'm going to end now, and I hope you guys all have a good day. Take care.